Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. During our weekly episodes, we explore the intersection of spirituality and psychology, and as a result, capture timeless wisdom contained in both fields. My name is Marcia Trajano, and today we're here to explore this quite fascinating and dare say that sometimes underestimated topic, the power of thought and all the impacts, all the connections to actions, to creativity, etc. But to dive into this topic, we have Jussara Korngold. Hi, Jussara, and Yuri Castro. Hey, Yuri, who are both passionate about the intersection of, yes, philosophy, psychology, and spiritist teachings. Welcome, all of you. And I just wanted to say thank you for joining this episode of Psychology and Spirituality with me. Hi, everyone. Do you want to say something, Yuri?
Hello, Marcia. Hello, Jussara. Hello, everybody who's watching us or listening to us. It's always a pleasure and an honor and such joy to be here talking about psychology and spirituality.
Absolutely. What about you, Jill? Do you want to say something?
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. First time I'm going to be, in this podcast with Yuri. So I'm sure we are going to bring some very useful, interesting thoughts for you all that are listening to us right now.
Awesome. Well, both of you, I was thinking, right? You probably heard Descartes' famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. From a spiritist perspective, though, we could say it goes even further, right? Not just I think, therefore I am, but I think, therefore I create. Every thought we nurture and they shape our actions, our character, and even our physical and spiritual health. And we are reminded that thinking is not a passive act. As I said, those thoughts, they work as a blueprint for action, whether visible or invisible, constructive or destructive. So I would like to, before we start talking, just put a question to everyone who's here with us as an audience to just imagine for a second that our minds are like a gardener. What are the seeds that we're planting right now with our thoughts? More to come with that, but I want to say, let's go ahead and get started from the beginning, right? Spiritism teaches that thought didn't just appear in its refined form that we have today, it evolved over countless incarnations. We went from instinctive survival thinking to this higher thinking capable of more choices and even awareness, right, between oneself and this overarching cosmic awareness. So what is the origin of thought? Is it the brain or the spirit? Jusara, do you want to take that one?
Again, for us to start, I would like to mention the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, Question
Sure.
76, where the Kardec asks the Spirit about, how can we define spirits? And the spirits reply that spirits may be defined as the intelligent beings of the universe. So when we are talking about intelligent beings of the universe, we are talking about exactly what René Descartes mentioned, the ability that we have as humans to think, to reason, to decide what we are going to do from that. Of course, his perspective, where purely in terms of the matter, right, material at that time, he was mostly thinking about, this engine that we have, the brain that made it possible for us to think, to reason, and what separates us from animals, for instance. So I think when we go around and we study this reply by the spirits,
Yeah.
We have an immense source of material to really start discussing about thoughts, this intelligence, this ability that we have for reasoning. But what is behind all that is, like you said, like your question, is it the spirit? Is it the body? Or how does it all interact? And I want Yuri to tell me about it. Yuri?
Yes. And Yuri, before you add to the question, right? Is it, where does the thought begin? I just wanted, because as a clinical psychologist, not Jungian psychology, but it's good for us to think about that. Right, Carl Jung brings this psychological parallel that he says that thought emerges from both our conscious mind and the deep unconscious, and it is shaped by archetypes and life experience. So it's even a third dimension to the question. But go ahead, Yuri. Do you want to add to the question?
Absolutely. I think it's a great starting point for us when you ask the matter or the thought, because as we learn through many different spiritist authors like Joanna De Angelis, like André Luiz, Jussara already mentioned the Spirit's book, we see that the mind, everything that the immortal spirit acquires throughout different reincarnations and different cycles of existence, be it incarnated or in the spirit plane, it carries through every new experience that we have. So when we reincarnate, the matter, let's say the body is kind of new, it's fresh and we're growing as kids, we develop, but this mortal spirit with all of that, all of what it has already acquired is there. So the thought is very much there in more primitive forms as we are, younger and trying to develop the biological component to be able to express ourselves, to translate from here to here, but the thought is already there. So I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah. And in Genesis, another book that Allan Kardec brought to us, right? It too reminds us that thought is this emanation of the spirit, not just a brain function. But there's so much work out there in neuroscience and the study of the brain and what causes what when, right? Yudin and Jussara. And I just wanted to maybe bring another tangent to it, which is how do instincts still influence our thinking today? Are there moments, and I maybe Jussara, you may want to speak to that, or Yuri, I don't know who feels that you want to add to this, but are there moments that perhaps we catch ourselves reacting without reflection, right? How does that do instincts play into that idea of what comes first and the idea of our thoughts that go through this evolution?
Also, again, mentioning the Spirit's book, we have it clearly shows that we have a misinterpretation in relation to instincts. We just think about, the base instincts, or when we use this word, but and the way that the Spirit's presented to us, it's almost like our guardian angel, because without having time to think, to decide, to know exactly what we are going to do, we just go and we just do. That's very much related to the instinct of survival, the law of preservation, and all of that. So it is a good thing because it protects us. Of course, even when we are talking about instincts in relation to our evolvement going through the three kingdoms, as it says, and reaching the hominid kingdom, the mineral, vegetable, animal, and the hominid, we we will see our instinct growing as well, very much like the free will that we have, that is going to grow in accordance to how our spirit is going to be more or less enlightened. So I think it's a very important subject, and for us not to be worried or to try to eliminate our instincts, because they can be very important. I normally I say when I drive, I keep on saving my purse, because I put the purse on the the seat next to me, and when something happens, immediately, because I learned that from my father, I go with my head like this, and I said, "Oh my God, I saved my purse again." It's great. One day, maybe, I hope it doesn't happen anyway, but it maybe it's going to be a person.
Yes.
Remember that I come from a time where we didn't value so much seat belts. Today we have seat belts, but yeah, is the replacement for
Yes.
the instinct that we have.
Yes. So we could call it the atavistic inheritance, right? Even though it's very specific to that. Oh, there's no seat belt. I'm taking care as a mom. I'm taking care of my young child. And we know that in a crash we couldn't, right? Unless you're superwoman, unless you have some superpowers, we don't know, Jussara. But the idea, I love that you brought it to us. There is this misinterpretation, as you said, of what does instinct means, and even taken into a very negative connotation. And good reminder, it's part of what we are today is because we went through that evolution of from instinct to the higher thought processes, right? And I think it's important. It is perhaps that primitive layer of our thinking, right? Our thought processes may be the very first step to how we're able to transform it, to become more transcending that aspect of survival.
But psychologically speaking, and then I think
Mm,
Yuri can explain better, those instincts certainly also comes from, those sides of us that are not so present, consciously speaking, right, Yuri? I don't know if...
Yes.
mhm.
They do come from that, and there's this idea too. You guys are talking about instinct. I agree. We have villainized instinct to a certain degree,
Yeah,
to the point where they're all bad. But think about the instinct of survival, where we're,
yeah,
as a human race, as all animals, we see like the mother instinct or the instinct of survival is what, even in mental health, we talk about this going, not even necessarily in a religious conversation or spiritual conversation. In
mm,
mental health, we talk about this instinct of survival being something that is very much plays an important role in the individual that is very depressed, or in the individual that is considering ending his or her own life. There's this instinct of survival that oftentimes stops them. That
mhm,
is something that's excellent. I'm glad we have the instinct, and one of them is this instinct of survival. But of course, as we progress, and we're talking about thought and instinct, as we
mhm,
progress, the thought as this instrument that we have to change ourselves, to change our realities, we're starting to understand more and more what it is. We understand, through the psychological lens, as you guys already mentioned as well, how we
mhm.
how we can wield that instrument.
I love it. It is an instrument, and we need to be skilled at using that instrument, right?
And
And
it's a very powerful one, Marcia. And I want to say too that we
yeah,
a lot of psychological um,
mhm,
theories or schools of therapy that focus a lot on changing our thoughts or analyzing our thoughts.
mhm,
Cognitive behavior therapy is a big one. Acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and then we
yeah,
have Freudian one, Jungian. We have a
yes.
bunch of different ramifications that will look at thought. How are our thoughts influencing us?
Yeah, and it is so interesting as a by the way, because when we think those types of therapies to change our thoughts, it immediately goes to Oh boy, we are so negative, right? We as a society, as a human race, we're so negative, and we always think the worst, and we remember those negative impacts to life. And so I've seen, and this is more of a self-help, more instead of other types of therapies, but we have to change your thoughts. We can get to positive affirmations, etc., etc. And then Jung says, no, right, Yuri? Jung says, observe your thoughts, which is quite interesting idea, right? You have to move yourself from being the subjective in the transaction with the thought into an objective viewer of the thought and understand, why am I thinking this? What is going on? Why am I reacting to that? So I find it quite interesting and refreshing for that, right? And
I have a
yeah, go
question.
ahead, Jussara.
Since you
Yes.
mentioned now your all these you know schools that analyzes thoughts, etc., would that be in the same area as analyzing the dreams as well? Would it's really a question because it just came to my mind because we always talk in terms of psychology,
Yeah.
to pay attention to the dreams, but now when we are talking about thoughts, and I mean dreams may be also the result of my thoughts. So can you expand a little bit about it?
Yes.
Or
Yuri, Jussara's getting to you. On this is what I call, she's throwing a curveball to Yuri. Go ahead, Yuri.
No, that's not a curveball. It's actually a good one because the not every I'm gonna say a lot of the schools of psychology or a lot of the schools of treatment, they don't actually look too much into dreams. There are some that do, and there's always this thing where some, even those who don't look too much into meanings of dreams or things like that, and I'm speaking merely psychologically here,
Yeah.
not talking about the spiritual notion of what happened when we actually dream, but just from the psychological standpoint, very like scientific standpoint, a lot of the schools of psychology that don't look into dreams, they still look how the individual is, we call ruminating. So it's thinking about the dream over and over and how that's impacting their day to day. So then you would approach that in that sense. So we talk about cognitive behavior therapy, like I said, the ones I mentioned before, and they aim at seeing how am I behaving with the thoughts that I'm having and the feelings and the emotions that are being elicited because of the thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, if you think about it, it's a little bit what Jung was saying so long ago, right, Yuri? If you think about it, you
Yeah,
objectify,
he
you
said
look.
that.
Yeah, go ahead.
He said that a long time ago, and there is a new type of therapy for the past, I would say, 20 years called acceptance and commitment therapy that proposes that we don't try to really change our thoughts, because we don't have that power necessarily to change as if we're like flicking a switch, but that we understand what we're thinking, how we're feeling, but we make room for the thoughts and the emotions, and then we focus on what we're doing. So our actions, the behaviors. And one curveball that I like to throw when I'm talking about this specific type of therapy, people say, I want to change my thoughts, and I know I can do it. I said, okay, so let's see. I don't want you to think of a white polar bear. Don't think of a white polar bear. I don't want you to really
Do
focus.
not think.
Don't think of a white polar bear. Don't think of you like passing your hand on that fur, how that fur would feel. And I'm pretty sure you two are not thinking about it because you're very controlled. What is that? That's an external stimuli coming from me that's affecting how you think.
Yes.
So that's something that is, it definitely goes back to what Jung was saying, like, let's observe what we're thinking and what's going on in here, because there's a lot of things in the environment that change and impact directly how we feel.
Absolutely.
I didn't think about the polar bear immediately. I thought first about Finland, where I went to a place that there was this huge polar bear. And I took
there you go.
And it was so
good. It's a good. So then it's still directed, kind of like shifted how you were thinking, because you're thinking something, and now you're like thinking about that memory. But the notion is, or the idea is, let's focus on what we're thinking, how we're behaving, and what we're doing necessarily. But again, this is the psychological piece. We also have the spiritual piece that
Yeah.
explains so much more than a lot of the schools of psychology. Even though that's my profession, they analyze and they work on, you know.
Yeah.
One of the Angeles, actually, we learned that through Divaldo Franco, that he used to give that or to talk about it in some of his talks in terms of thoughts, and what can I do with my bad thoughts? And according to what Joanna told him is, you just let it happen the way it happens, and try after you finish with that, because like you said, immediately we thought about the polar bear. Okay, now the polar bear is behind me, and I will leave my mind to be drawn to something good, to something positive. Because like you said, if I keep on thinking, like, people that are dealing with some type of addiction, or smokers, let's say, have a smoker. I'm not going to smoke a cigarette. Just by saying cigarette, you immediately feel urge to go through that. So, and then what she says, we cannot just erase it or try to pull it under the rug, right?
Yeah,
because it's going to be there. But little by little, when we deal with that, the good, we will create space for the good thoughts, which is actually what we are trying to achieve, incarnation after incarnation, with the perfectioning of the spirit.
Yeah. So I was thinking, just as a by the way, right? Brain, spirit, the origins of thoughts, but then what really has led to the evolution from instinctive survival responses to this now, today, higher reasoning and more awareness? Because I think, Jussara, from a spiritual perspective, specifically, right? How does that spiritual evolution expand our perception, even of the divine within, that sacred space within us? And Yuri, I have another question for you. I'm going to say, and then I go ask Jussara again, just so you can see the yin and yang here in yin and yang, sorry, of those two questions. But if you think the brain's an instrument, right, Yuri, thought is then transcendental emanation of the spirit. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about brain and spirit, but go back to Jussara. Jussara, how does it that as we evolve, spiritually speaking, we also expand, we augment our perception of the divine within?
Yeah, it's actually one of the points that Joanna de Angelis, we see that even when we think about ourselves the way we are, we have thoughts, like, mental construct of things that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
And so from where did they come from? Right. And many of the things we know, and we study in spiritual studies about exactly the possibility of the growing of the spirit. This growing of the spirit means through the challenges, the natural challenges that we will be having, from incarnation to incarnation. And remember, in this podcast, we are talking, we always talk about reincarnation. Okay, so we start from the principle that there is reincarnation and that we come from other experience, because otherwise it doesn't make that much sense why we present ourselves today, if this is our first life, not
Yeah.
as cavemen, for instance, and we
Mhm.
have all this accumulated knowledge that somehow we just know how to do it. We just know how to deal with things, like, you know, we call it talent. We may say, oh, this is a genius person, but it comes from previous experience. So
Mhm.
according to Juana de Angelis, the more we go through those existences and we face you know, the problems, the experiences at hand, we will be acquiring more and more knowledge, more and more understanding, but to the point that we are not talking just about intellect, to the
Yeah.
point that we are talking about us as ourselves. So now I understand that I am a mortal spirit. Now I understand that I have reincarnations. Now I understand that what I do have consequences and that I will have to deal with that consequences. And so with those experiences, you know, of facing things that we were not capable of facing or dealing before, now we are dealing with that. For instance, if we are talking about a heat wave,
Mhm.
God, we have ACs now in our homes, but it was, you know, the result of study, of spirit development as well, to go and come about with solutions to problems. And, you
Yeah.
know, briefly speaking, we can use that just for started for us to
Yeah.
think about it a little bit more in this aspect.
Yeah, but let's. I'd like for you to maybe go even further, right? So we talked about as we grow, incarnation, uh, through incarnation, and we grow intellectually, but also in other aspects. But how specifically, Jussara, how does it expand our own in our self-awareness, but the awareness of the divine within, our connection to God, our Creator?
Yeah, this is what Jung says in terms of individuation, and we
Mhm.
spiritists says well, we talk about
Mhm.
reaching perfection, right?
Yeah.
And perfection in the sense that I will be able to become a whole, that I'm going
Yeah.
to integrate self and ego and all of that, and I will just see myself and be able to deal with all of those things.
Yeah.
So it comes to a point where, and this is a point that I believe actually we are living in our society nowadays,
Mhm.
that is this
Mhm.
inner anguish that we have, something that it, you know, it makes us very uncomfortable, and that cannot be appeased with material things. We may get distracted with them, you know, it may be temporarily take my
Mhm.
mind off it, take my thoughts out of it, but then there is this uh, you know, idea that we belong to something, we have a connection to something that is greater than ourselves. And it's when we go into this philosophical purposes. Actually, the other day I was studying the life of, sorry, I'm just going to
No, please, please do. This is very good. Thank you.
studying the life of Saint Catherine of Alexandria.
Yeah.
And she was considered to be a very, very, I mean, we are talking 4th century here, right? A very smart woman. And she was capable of facing philosophers that were scholars from the Plato, Aristotle, Socrates' schools, and replying to their answers in a way that with so much logic. But there was something in her that caused her, you know, this inner thirsty, that she couldn't know what to do with that, and until
Mhm.
she uh, uh, actually started, got to the knowledge. She got the knowledge of the Christianity, and he started attending some of, you know, the Christian meetings that they had at that
Yeah.
time, also in
The
Alexandria.
early Christians. Yeah. Yeah.
Christians, and then there was this purpose, and then she understood things, and then she transformed herself, and to the point of being, of course, she was, I think she was beheaded, but before that, she was before the emperor and all the court and everyone, and she was replying to all the questions and showing how Christianity and Christ was actually a thing, in a way that it is said that many people in that day, because of her process for execution, they became Christians as well. So we know how rich it is when we go through this self-transformation, and
Yes.
to this point that there is this 30, and actually I was studying the life of Saint Edith Stein. She's known as Saint Therese something, and it's the same thing. She was a Jewish, very brilliant mind, maybe even the reincarnation of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, because when she was 14, she completely rebelled against, all religious principles. And it was just reason, and it was in Germany. And she went to study in a very good school. She had one of the brightest academic teachers at that time, co-author books with him. But there was this emptiness. And she had a friend, because a couple that was friend of her from the academy as well. And the husband was killed in the First World War, and she was so astonished with the resilience and of the wife. And she went to visit his wife and said, "I don't understand. How can you be like this?" And then she was a Christian, and she had a book that talked about the lives of Saint Teresa d'Avila and Saint Augustine. And she started studying that, and she went through baptism and then, to lose her life in Auschwitz. But, it is this Thursday that we have that leads us to this, need to self-transformation and increase those spiritual possibilities in us.
I love what you're saying, right? Which is the higher our thoughts grow, and examples of Saint Catherine, right, of Alexandria, as well, Saint Teresa, they are beautiful minds, but they lead themselves into that connecting with what would otherwise be this emptiness that we have. We are more, as you said before, we belong to something much bigger than what we are. I love it. I love this story. I'm going to go to you, Yuri, because I asked you before, and just wanted you to maybe talk to us about it now in the more physiological, biological, right? We talk about the brain. Brain is an instrument, but it is also, when we see thought as this transcendental emanation of the spirit, how can we correlate brain activities and the spirit? I think this is another curveball, right, Yuri?
No, it's another good one. That's not a curve.
Good one. All right.
Yes, because just before I say that, I just had a comment on something that you guys were talking when Jussara was saying. I was thinking about the Gospel According to Spiritism by Allan Kardec, when they're talking about chapter 25, when they're talking about how man has this desire to progress. And Jussara, you said it very well, this desire, this thirst, that it's almost like there's something more, this hunger for something more, which differentiates us and disconnects directly with thought from the other animals. Because before, way before, millions of years ago, we would do what? We would fend off enemies, we would hunt for food and find shelter. That's it. But animals do that too. But man is capable of doing something more. Humanity is capable of doing something more. And it's this desire for progress and to progress that has led us to where we are. And the spirit is very much behind that. And the thought is a a reflex or
Yeah.
sorry, a reflection of that, because
Yeah.
the idea that we can think way different than other animals can, there's something there. There's something to be said about how we have evolved biologically, Marcia, and that's your question about the brain as this
Yeah.
sort of pathway for our thoughts and all of that, this house for our thoughts, maybe we can call it like that. But of course, if we think about the spirit as being something that's immortal,
Yeah.
something that has had different experiences, something that has evolved, certainly it needs adequate instruments to continue its progress. By instruments, we can think bodies, our brains, for instance. So there is a clear evolution of the body, human body, and the brain itself, as that is congruent, or I should say even concomitant, happens at the same time as the evolution of the body, the brain and the thought. So our bodies and our brains are evolving, and our thoughts are becoming more complex. We're starting to grasp at more subjective things, which our ancestors could not grasp as subjective things. We're better, Jussara mentioned technology too, we're better at planning things right now. We're better at doing so many other things that thousands and thousands of years ago, the humans that were here could not. So brain changed throughout, human history. Around, let's say 500,000 years ago, there was a big spike, and we saw like how brain increased in size. So we already see a difference in size. But more than that is the difference between the complexity of the brain functions. So the brain grew.
Can you tell us when was it there was that spike that led to a change in the brain size? I was just curious.
Yeah, it's almost 1,000,000 years ago. That's the easiest way to remember. But they say between 800,000 and like 300,000, 200,000 years ago, we saw a big spike and I say spike, I mean, it was a big increase in the size of the human brain as we started to become more complex as a society and have more complex functions. But there's also the notion of, how size is not all that matters as well. It's like, is the complexity of the function. Because if we think of the whale, like there's a whale whose brain weighs 20 pounds.
Yes.
Ours weigh 3 pounds. So, but we are far more intelligent. So what is it? Is the complexity of the functions as the brain develops, as we're capable of expressing thought, and the spirit that is becoming more enlightened and more complex as after each reincarnation. The brain is also following this process, so the spirit can express itself. And I just want to add one more thing too, biologically speaking, that's interesting for us to realize how before we were, there was way more aggression. There were way more of the basic emotions, let's say 1,000,000 years ago, right? And now we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the most, the last part of the brain that develops, by the way, which is interesting because our brain, it grows from bottom up and back to front. So there's this idea that the functions that are more basic, like movement and emotional functions, they develop first. Last but not least is the prefrontal cortex, which is related to planning, which is related to attention, executive functioning. All these things that are way more complex that our ancestors all the way back then didn't have as evolved as we have. And as we see with thought is the same thing. They both follow this gradual progression.
Yeah. I love it. I love it that we gave both sides the house in terms of explaining that evolution of thoughts, the evolution of a brain, and I think you mentioned, Jussara, already about the individuation, right? But I was thinking, do you want to perhaps talk further about how the concept of individuation relates specifically to the development of thoughts, right?
I was thinking about, spirits has been use the terminology of perispirit, right? Because we as spirits are accompanied by a spiritual body, and other philosophical spiritualist lines of thinking may use different terminology. So, but our spiritual body as being the one that is the organized biological model for our physical body.
Yes.
So as we were talking before, the more we depend in spirit and in spirituality, in this connection to what we truly are. Like, you know, we have a latent light, so to say, or inner light within ourselves that is shadowy by all the layers that will help us to act as a spirits in spiritual bodies and in corporeal bodies. So when it comes the time for us to reincarnate, according to how we are evolving spiritually speaking, our perispirit, our spiritual body, will have a direct let's say, impact on how the physical body is going to develop. And this is in the line of what Yuri was explaining, because or through, you know, we were obliged to come up with solutions, with facing challenges. And I don't say obstacles or difficulties or suffering. I really like to call them challenges for us to grow in intelligence. I mean, if you keep a child at home without exposing this child to the world, what is going to happen to this child, right? What kind of experience and you know, be able to use this pre-cortex, like you said, right, Yuri? Yes. It comes a time that I will have to have the power to decide and all of this. So this is what is going to impact in terms of, you know, biologically speaking, like you were talking before, in terms of how we are going to be reflected in our corporeal body. But then when we talk about individuation, when we are talking about this spiritual progression, again, it is, you know, trying to find balance within ourselves. And at the moment, we do not live, you know, a life of balance in any sense. Even when we have a religion, spirituality, I say, can you say that the spirituality or religion is like 10 or 20% in your life? Because, you know, for most of the people, it's going to be tops 20%. So 80% of our time we are dealing with other things, and we are not dealing with ourselves. So this process, and I think that this is what Joanna de Angelis also brings to us in many of her books, in terms of being conscious about thoughts and how we can put our mind into action in a good way.
I love it. I think this is getting really interesting here. We have just a few more minutes together today, but Joanna does state that everything in us begins with a thought, right, Jussara? It first comes the idea, then it sketches possibilities, and eventually it becomes an action. And if we think about it, right, Jesus in Matthew 5:28 said, to lust after someone in your heart is already to commit the act inwardly. And I'm just thinking, how does Jesus' words reflect this context of thought and action? Who would like to perhaps talk about the trigger, right? I'm thinking, therefore there is an action that is created from the thought process.
I think for that we can go to Genesis. We're talking a lot of Kardec today. I can go to Genesis to understand a little bit more the cosmic fluid and how thought actually changes the environment and all of that. And I think that's a good starting point. But I also think of the importance of the thought, as you're saying, Marcia, this trigger and all of that, when Jesus also in Matthew, this time 26:41, watch and pray. Watch what? You know? Watch and pray. And what is the prayer? You know, if it's not this emanation that we emanate, sorry to be, you know, redundant, but this thing that we actually send, and the thoughts. And I think Jesus, all the way back then, 2,000 years ago almost, he was already alluding to how important it is for us to be mindful and vigilant of our thoughts, because they do have a lot of impact on our environment. I know if Jussara wants to add something as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to be for the next chapter when we are going to be talking about, our thoughts and how we communicate with spirits, because the spirits do not give us, the whole sentence in whatever language. They give us images, and the images are so powerful. And of course, I'm eager to live in the future where we will be able to communicate with much less words than today,
Yeah.
able um, to see the thoughts of others,
Yeah.
like spirits can see our thoughts by images and by
Mm-hmm.
representations, by signals that when I look at an apple with a bite, I don't need to make the whole sentence and explanation to that. It's obvious that someone is eating or ate that that
Mm-hmm.
apple, right? And sometimes we like right now, I'm using so many words just to say that. And when we see it, and so I think it's so amazing when we think about this.
Yeah.
And also to be careful, really careful with our thoughts, because
Yes.
the first one that is going to be infected positively or negatively is you. Because if it is good, if it's a good thought, it's going to irradiating and give you an extraordinary aura, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
something negative, it's going to be shadowy, dark,
Yeah.
and it's going to put you down, and it's going to attract in
Yeah.
both sides of life people
Yes.
that are going to attune with this mental construct that you have. And even
Absolutely. Yeah. No, this is awesome. And if we talk a little bit further, right? The mental act already starts to shape reality
Mm-hmm.
through, how does it do it, right? Energetically, spiritually, and emotionally. So I love what you said. Maybe we can come back in a future episode, Jussara, to talk about the idea of how does it work, the images. But there's another book, Emmanuel, the spirit author Emmanuel, in Thought in Life, right? He does compare thought to this architect, right? It is the blueprint that you draw in your mind, and eventually that blueprint finds a way to be constructed, executed, or manifested. And in psychology, you maybe you want to add something else, right? It shows when we change our thinking, we change our behavior, right? The cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah, and again, with you mentioned Emmanuel, of course, because every idea, every big realization started as a thought.
Yeah,
So every
yeah,
act, good or bad, starts small, starts as a thought in the mind of the person who eventually fulfills that action. So
hmm,
everything is like when you say it's the architect and it's the blueprint. That's why, which I also love. I love that book, Thought in Life. And
yeah,
in the future, hopefully, it's like Jussara is saying, we're going to be living in a world, which there are worlds like that, where we communicate by thought, where the vocal cords are going to be non-existent or useless. Because even now, when you're talking about the apple, I thought of Leon Denis Jussara saying, how could we try to explain the subtle things of the spirit in our weak language? We can't. And I like to give the example: try to explain what love is,
yeah,
and
yeah,
think about if you really were able to encapsulate everything that love is. We can't. We
yeah,
lack words, we lack vocabulary, but the thought is there, the
yeah,
sentiment is there.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We are at time, and I just wanted to see if either one of you want to say your final thoughts and ideas before we close our episode today.
I think Yuri is really teasing us today, because when we finish our podcast, I will be thinking about the polar bear and
Polar bear.
love. How would I define love? Right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that, I'm going to use, some of my 60,000, 70,000 thoughts a day thinking
Yes,
about a polar bear and
yes, yes. It's crazy, right? How outside of the controls that we can
Oh
put
yes.
it, it can go everywhere, right? Yuri, any final thoughts before we close?
I think it was a great conversation. We definitely need to do another one now on question 459 of the Spirit's book. How much are we influenced? Because when I
Yeah.
mentioned the polar bear, I'm an incarnate spirit influencing your thoughts. How do they invisible friends or not so good friends influence us? And I think again, the final message I think is just watch, watch and pray, be vigilant, be mindful, understand how powerful this instrument that we have perfected or we have used throughout our history actually is. Our thoughts can very
Yeah.
much change our how we feel, how we behave, how we interact with the world around us. So being mindful of that.
I love it. I love your ideas for future episodes. I'm taking notes. And for everyone, I pose in the beginning a reflection to think of ourselves as gardeners. And if you move into the idea that every thought is a seed, right? Um, we start to make some correlation. You cannot harvest roses if all you're planting is poisonous plants, right? So let's think about it. We talked a lot about many different spiritist teachings today, and alongside some psychological and philosophical ideas that came through our conversation today, they all remind us that thought is not just what happens in our head, but it's also this invisible hand that is shaping our today and our tomorrow. But everyone, if this is was the first time that you listen to our program, please note that the Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna De Angelis, and we hope we're able to um, get some ideas to think about it and further massage those ideas. But I wanted to thank you, Jussara. Thank you, Yuri. What a pleasure. I want to also thank our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spirits Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. Thank you, all of you, and until next time, everyone.